Dr. Corinne Low, welcome to the podcast. It is really good having you here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to talk.
I've been looking forward to this. We talked right before we hit record that this topic, you're a brand new author. First off, congratulations. Today, the
Thank
release of
you.
this podcast is the release day for your book. It is Having It All, What Data Tells Us About Women's Lives and Getting the Most Out of Yours. You're not messing around. This is a very important topic. Congratulations, Corinne.
Thank you so much.
So tell me, what was the motivation for this particular book? You can write about anything. Why this?
Well, I actually can't write about anything because this book is about what I've studied for my entire career. And I wanted to write it for exactly that reason, that I had been doing this research and publishing it in academic journals that I felt like had so much insight into the struggles that I was facing in my own life and that all of my friends were facing. And I was like, I need to get this out to more people and start this conversation so that we can really acknowledge the things that are making our lives uniquely challenging as working women, working moms at this point in time.
I think it's fantastic. By the way, I am holding your CV. Unbelievable the amount of research, and as you said, you've committed your life to this topic. Really, really incredible. One of the things that I read in your book, and it hit me like a brick, you talked about you were at the stage of your life where you were trying to have it all, but you write you didn't have anything. Tell us more about that time in your life, because I think we all can relate to that.
Yeah. So I start in 2017, which is when I gave birth to my son. And I say in the book, also gave birth to a midlife crisis because everything that had worked up until that point stopped working. I was commuting from New York City to my job in Philadelphia. I had a marriage that I thought was kind of okay. It wasn't perfect, but, kind of okay. And that felt like it started falling apart. I was just juggling so many things, and I was on the tenure track at Wharton. And so it's publish or perish. And so you have to be churning papers out. And I'm watching as my male colleagues just seem to be able to publish so much faster than me. And I felt like I was really falling behind. And so, the rock bottom was, I before I had my son, my commute, I would go and I would stay overnight, maybe even for a couple nights, and then I would come back. But once, I had a nursing infant at home, I wanted to get back. And so I would go there and back in a day. And so there's this moment in the book where I'm on the train for 6 hours to be in the office for 4 hours, right?
Real.
And, I'm pumping in the Amtrak bathroom and just crying and thinking, what did I do? How did I end up here? How did I end up with this feeling of like, nothing is working? It's not like I have some things that are working. It's like nothing is working.
I don't, I'm not going to pretend to understand the perspective of working moms and women. I remember from a guy's standpoint, I remember a point in my career, I was living in Chicago and I was getting up early to go to the train station and a 2-hour train ride down to Chicago. And it was just the churn, just back and forth. And I was just wore out. I was burned out. But Corinne, the difference is my wife was a nurse, but she was working very, very part-time at the time. And I always knew that she was taking care of things at home. And I can't tell you, even though I was burned out, I just knew things were good back home. What are you hearing me describe in your world on research and things? But none of that is a surprise to you, is it?
I mean, what you just described is absolutely kind of the difference between, working dads and working moms, being able to walk out the door and kind of know. And so thank you for your honesty, because that was the feeling, is that every time I was in Philadelphia for work, I was like, had a zillion and one things that in my brain I was taking care of, or physically I would be, on my phone, checking in, arranging things, making sure that groceries were coming, making sure that we had a meal plan for the week, right? Trying to arrange backup childcare if our childcare had to cancel. And then I at some point became the sole breadwinner also. And so I was doing that as the sole breadwinner. And I was observing that then in my male colleagues' relationships, because you might think it just comes down to, as you said, your wife was working part-time and you had this career, right? So you might think it just comes down to who's the breadwinner. But I became the breadwinner and I was still carrying that. And so I started looking at the data on women's time use, and I started looking at how it varied with the relative income distribution in the household.
Okay. Well, let's go a little further into that then. I was reading a paper of yours, and the title was Winning the Bread and Baking It Too. And then it's chapter 1 in your book, which I really, really loved. You make the point that men haven't kept up with the changing roles.
Yeah, so we have had this enormous change in gender roles. It feels like, right, over the past 70 years, and women have, entered the workforce in these astounding numbers. But when I looked at the data, what I found is that gender roles have converged in the workplace, but they haven't converged at home. So I look
Huh.
at women's time use and I see that it's changed substantially over that period. But when I look at men's time use, men are still working on average 40 hours a week,
Hmm.
and their time doing housework has actually stayed completely the same since 1975. I can track it with there's this one survey where I have housework time going back to 1975, and men's is completely flat since then. And that really creates this perfect storm for women who are trying to have a high powered career, because then they are facing this barrier that, compared to a man in a similar position, they just don't have the support at home, which means they don't have the same hours in their day. Now, what changed in the 1990s is that, in addition to this kind of perfect storm of women entering the workforce and men not stepping up at home, starting in the 1990s, we see an explosion in parenting time. So, mothers today spend twice as much time as mothers a generation ago with our children. And so when women are saying, I feel like it's just not adding up, what am I doing wrong? The problem is not you. The problems are structural. You are literally trying to do more with less. And people are like, well, how is that possible? Well, if you go back, 40 years ago, we didn't have the science of developmental psychology, of child development, to understand that our time with our babies and toddlers and grade schoolers was crucial for child development. So mothers in the 80s were not breastfeeding and baby wearing and pumping when they went back to work, and sitting on the floor with their toddlers and sitting at the kitchen table with their grade schoolers and driving to travel soccer games, right?
True. Right.
I grew up in the 1980s, and everybody here listening probably has had that experience of having the elaborate bedtime routine with your child where you decompress and talk about what happened that day, and then you really just try to get them to go to sleep. Okay. My bedtime routine in the 1980s was go to bed. And so
I
it's a
love that.
beautiful affirmative choice that we are trying to give our kids something different than what we experienced, and that it really is good for them. We have the science to show that it's good for them. And it's enormously costly in terms of our time.
Wow. You're the researcher. Let me gently challenge that. Are we sure it's good for them? You talked about the 80s.
Yeah.
I grew up in the 70s. I think the question my parents asked, they maybe yelled downstairs, "Are you home?"
Yeah,
And that was
exactly.
it. And then, okay, good night. And that was it. But in all seriousness, though, all the focus then on the child, et cetera. And I mean,
Yeah.
is there a downside to that? I mean, are we sure it's helpful to the to the child? Is what
Well,
I'm asking.
that's exactly what I try to challenge in the book, is to ask people to really look at how they spend their time, and to ask, like, which things are getting me the return and which things are a sense of obligation or keeping up with the neighbors or the kids' friends' parents, right?
Right.
Because I think you're right. I think we have lost something of, like, I was feral biking around the neighborhood at all hours. And there's something about that is actually good for you, right? To
It
kind of
is.
develop that self reliance. No snacks, no water bottles.
No.
We must have been very dehydrated, right? Um, so yes, I think that there is this question of, like, where are we doing too much? Now, I don't think that is in the with the infants and the young children, where really we literally didn't understand that you needed to hold and talk to your babies.
There
That's
you go.
new science, and we literally didn't know. Daycare used to look like, you could have 30 infants all in cribs with a bottle and nobody actually holding them and talking to each one,
Yeah.
right? And that's part of why actually childcare has gotten so much more expensive, is that we understand now more what it actually requires. But then there's the things that I ask, do we need to be doing this? I see working women with high powered careers blending homemade baby food at home, in their Vitamixes, right?
Right.
I see moms saying, and also dads, because by the way, dads' parenting time has gone up as well. It hasn't kept up with moms, but this has changed for everybody. I see parents driving their kids to 6 different activities during the week so that they don't have a single night where they get to come home after work and just, have dinner at home and relax, right?
Yeah.
And I push people to say, which of these are necessary, which of these things are actually contributing to child development, and which things have I told myself my kid needs? Because if we run ourselves ragged to the point where we are so depleted, and that's the point that I was at, where I was so exhausted that I had lost my patience. I had
Hmm.
lost my cool as a mom, right? I wasn't able to be present and engaged because my cup was so empty, right? And so I ask parents, say, look, does your kid need that thing, that those hand decorated birthday cupcakes or that magical party you're trying to throw or whatever it is, or do they need you to be able to actually spend relaxed, connected time with them where you're not snapping, where you can sit down and play the board game, or where you can listen to the story that they have? Sometimes when your kid comes home just
Yeah.
talking your ear off and it's just like blah, 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 and you're like, I can't do this right now. I'm trying to cook dinner, right? What do they actually need? And I think that is something we have to push ourselves on.
Oh, I love that. One of the things I appreciated most about the book is that it is backed up by research, but it's just looking at this issue from a completely different lens, one that I've never done before. I also want to just tell you a quick story. You talked about the quality of the time. When my kids were young, I was trying to be dad of the year, and we decided to go to Disney World. Right? Packed up the Honda Odyssey. I went into debt in order to take them to Disney World, 2-day road trip. And we got home. The kids were, 8, 9 years old. And I said, okay, everybody, what was your favorite part of the trip? And you know what the answer was? The answer was swimming at the Hampton Inn in Tennessee.
Yes, yes.
In other words, it was just this pool time on a weeknight after a
Yeah.
long trip, and we were in the pool and just horsing around. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's a life lesson. Yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is what the book is kind of a call to action for all of us to do, is to simplify and radically prioritize. And by building it up and backing it up with that data, I give you the permission to do that. Because
good.
if you don't understand the way our time is getting squeezed, and I actually show it in the book, I have this graph called the squeeze, where I show that it's on average in our 30s because of when people have kids. But when we have young kids at home, we're making career investments at the same time. Our time just gets squeezed. It balloons like a mountain, all of our obligations. And then because we're still making career investments, as you said, we don't have money to throw at the problem. We're actually not at a point in our lives where we can, you know, do the luxury thing or say, oh, okay, we'll just outsource everything, right?
Yeah,
So when we're in the squeeze, we have to just say, what is the bare minimum, the minimum viable product, right? And what do my kids actually need? And then I can say yes later. I can take them on that expensive trip later, right? I can do the volunteer role that I've been wanting to do later. I can lean in a little bit extra at my job later, stay a little bit later, right?
hmm,
Right now, when I'm in this moment, I need to pull resources in to the central operating of our household and not feel bad that I'm going to kind of keep it lean and keep it tight, because that's what's going to keep me sane. And that's what's going to enable you to have that moment where you're carefree playing with your kids in the pool, right? Which is actually what they are going to remember.
that's so good. There's a lot there. As an economist, I love the way you think, and you write and you talk about the scarcity of resources, just as an economist would, and the utility that that creates. I really want to hone in on what you believe about time.
Yes. So this is the one of the most important concepts in the book. It's how to think about your happiness and your life like an economist. And economists kind of model people as maximizing something called utility. So the same way when we approach studying firms and we model them as maximizing profit because that's the goal for firms, well, what is the equivalent for people? And we call it utility. And the reason we need a new word is because happiness isn't quite the right term, because sometimes we have to do something that doesn't feel like super happy in the moment, like, setting a screen time limit with our kids, right? But that has sort of a longer term payoff, or setting a screen time limit with ourselves, closing Netflix to work on
Right.
a project. It doesn't feel like we're maximizing happiness, but we're actually maximizing something deeper called utility. So utility is your deep joy, fulfillment, contentment, and meaning over a lifetime. It's what you would look back on when you're 85 years old on a front porch in a rocking chair and say, that was a life well lived. That's utility. You're trying to maximize it, and your resources that you have to maximize it are your time and your effort, and they are scarce resources. And so if you choose to put it one place, you can't put it someplace else. And so when you're trying to get through a tough period like the squeeze, right, you want to figure out, where am I getting the highest return to put my time and my effort, and you want to put it there.
I love it. You call it out as the scarcest of resources, that of
Mm-hmm.
all the things in our life, it is all about that time. How could someone then reframe and shift?
Yeah, absolutely. There's this book called Your Money or Your Life, and they frame it in such a visceral way that it's always stuck with me, where they say, when you are working, you're trading your life force for material possessions, and you have to decide how much of that you want to do, right? So I reframe how we think about our jobs, where I think a lot of the business books that are on the airport shelves
Hmm.
have kind of trained us to think of our jobs as our purpose in life, as
Yes.
the thing that we're trying to maximize career success. And especially for women, because for women, I hear so often it doesn't even just feel, it's not just about the career and the money. For them, it's about like making progress for, women overall, and, kind of following these trailblazers and showing that they can do it and showing that they're equal. So we have been trained to think your career is your goal in life, right? But in order to maximize your career, you have to put your time and effort into that. And so I want to reframe to say, if you think about your goal as actually maximizing utility, then you understand that your career is only a part of that. How does that fit in? Well, one, maybe you enjoy it, but I challenge people to say, here's how we identify your utility function. Tell me, if money was no object, if you were independently wealthy, how would you spend your time? And very few people say, well, I would make sure to finish up those PowerPoint presentations and that Excel spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
Very few people enjoy their job enough that they would really do it with a significant share of their time, right? And I'm not saying you wouldn't do it sometimes, right? Like, I like teaching. I would teach one class a week, sure, right?
Yeah.
But that they would spend a significant portion of their time on their job if they weren't getting money out of it. So what is your job? Your job is a tool to convert your time into money, which is useful for maximizing utility, because some of the things that you get utility from a roof over your head to food to eat to paying for activities for your kids, vacations, the car you drive, need to be purchased with money.
Right.
So your job is like an ATM that you put time into and you get money out of. Okay. But if you think of it that way, you kind of have different priorities in how you think about your job than if you think of your job as your purpose in life. Because now you're thinking, okay, how do I get the best time to money conversion rate when I need it most, right? And how do I make sure it's going to give it to me at the times when life is kind of hardest? Because if I still have to put all of my time into the money machine at the time when I have young kids at home, that machine's not working that well for me, right? I need a machine that I can put a limited amount of time into and get kind of a healthy sum of money out of. And I think, I also, in other ways, thinking about your time as a scarce resource, I tell people to reframe outsourcing, because I don't want to be kind of out of touch. The book is for people of all socioeconomic statuses. And like I said, it's for people who are in the squeeze where, it is a real choice. And it's not just like, oh, I have so much money, whatever, throw money at it. But I ask people to think of not outsourcing something as hiring yourself to do it.
I think that's a great point. Unbelievable. Tell me more about that.
So we rarely do that for male coded tasks. So if you think about it, right? Most men who kind of have the type of career that I think a lot of your listeners have, they don't do their own car repairs.
That's right.
They don't get up on the roof and repair the roof, right?
Never.
They don't
Never.
fix the leaky shower. And those are male coded tasks that you could do yourself, right? But they think, look, there's somebody out there who's actually an expert at this. I'm not, and my time is too expensive for that. But with female coded tasks, we somehow think that women should be able to insource those tasks and work full time in the market. And so if you're, a lawyer who bills at a certain rate, if you're an entrepreneur who could have new ideas or chase down new clients, if you're a nurse who could pick up an extra shift, right? When you are thinking about doing a task yourself, you have to ask yourself, can I afford that much of my own time? Should I hire myself for this job? Or should I put my time someplace else, including into recharging my batteries so I can do all of those things that are so important to the household?
Okay, everyone, you just got everyone's attention driving to work or driving to school. Everyone's nodding at that. Okay. So then what's getting in the way of that, Corinne? I mean, it sounds simple, but what are the headwinds that women are facing that remind them that no, they can't do that, they shouldn't do that, they feel guilty because of that? Why is that happening?
Society tells us that we should be able to do both seamlessly, right? So we are fed these images of women who are these domestic goddesses, right? And we think, oh, my life should be able to look like that. And of course, I should be able to cook this beautiful, healthy, balanced meal for my kids. And I should be able to have this beautifully decorated home. And I should be able to, also dress and look and present myself a certain way and have a career. But I want to call that out because those women who are selling you that image are lying because that is their career.
Ooh,
And if that was your job, you would be as good at it as you are at your real job. Okay. But your career and trying to be this, domestic goddess trad wife, those are two separate full-time jobs and you do not have time for both. And so I think it's our own internalized expectations. I think the biggest thing is once you understand the time data, once you've looked at it the way I have, right, then you can understand this does not add up. And I need to have entirely different expectations of what's possible.
okay. Well, so are we really is this a different way of thinking about setting boundaries, or am I making it way too simplistic, Corinne?
Well, some of them are boundaries with ourselves, right? Some of them are just like, hey, no, I'm not going to, hold myself to this standard of expecting that there's going to be home cooked food every single night, right? And we need to have some boundaries with work. And so I tell people to think about things that do not explicitly contribute to you getting paid or getting a promotion, to think of those things as volunteer work for your job and say, do I really want to volunteer for this billion-dollar company, right?
Hmm.
Or maybe I do, maybe because I work for a business that I really care about, or I am the business owner, I really care about my employees. So you might have seen this in the book that I talk about this study. It's not my study, but I love this study where they offered women different jobs. You could have the kind of 9 to 5, 40-hour a week job, or you could work from home or have flexible hours. You choose the hours. Women were not interested in those other two jobs, okay? The flexible hours, the work from home. They were willing to give up, a teeny bit of pay maybe, and the flexible hours, they didn't even want it. But when they were offered the alternative that was your boss sets your hours and can tell you, hey, you got to work, today it's 6 a.m. to noon and tomorrow it's going to be 2 p.m. to close or whatever, they were willing to give up 40% of their pay to avoid that job. What
Really?
does that tell me? Women don't need flexibility, they need boundaries, right? It's that lack of predictability that's extremely costly because every time someone tells me women need flexible work, I say, nursing, which is what your wife did, which is extremely inflexible, people
Right.
often work 12-hour shifts, is 86% female. Why
Hmm.
does it work for women? Because it's extremely structured. They know when they're on and when they're off. And even if you're going to get called in, it's because you're on call for that specific time, right?
That's
And so
really a
we
great
can
point.
we can reclaim some of that for ourselves. We don't have to wait for someone to give it to us. We can recognize what I need is boundaries on working time. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the office, put in the 9 to 5 at the office, and then I'm going to block out 5 to 8 on my calendar, go home and have dinner and put my kids to bed. And then if I need to, I'm going to log back on at 8 p.m. from home.
It's true. Absolutely right. The name of the book, everybody, is Having It All. And one of the descriptions on this book, Corinne, is it is the essential economics textbook for life as a woman. Okay, that's maybe the ultimate compliment. Are you kidding me? The essential economics textbook for life as a woman. Why do you think it received that high of praise?
Well, I that was my goal. My goal was to say that look, economists, there's so many books that talk about, study firms and study the stock market and study trade and all of these things, right? but women are making hugely important economic decisions in our lives every day. And there wasn't enough research on it. And that's why I've spent my career studying it. And so I want to tell you that these same tools that a lot of the listeners, they're using them in their business, right? And you can use them at home. You can kind of maximize that personal profit function, your utility function at home. You can find leaner ways to operate at home. And so I really hope that I am giving people those tools.
That's great. I want to go back to your point about outsourcing. I think that for everyone listening, that I think that is a real unlock. That feels like a simple step that people could try.
Absolutely. And I think so often, whoever you outsource it to, they have greater efficiency in that task and returns to scale than you do, right? So,
Hey,
like if you hire a laundry service, right, it's not an individual who's putting things in the washer and taking them out, right? They have an efficient kind of scaled way to do this. And so, often if you think of your time as worth something, it really is cheaper. So you say, wait, it's $20 a load to hire this laundry service. I'm like, how long does it take you to do it? And what is your time worth?
that's good. Boy, there it is. Economics professor again, everybody. Okay, now let's shift gears. I got to talk about relationships because marriage rates are declining. In the book, you talk about the selecting a partner, and there's a line here about interviewing for the position. What do you mean by interview for the position?
Yeah, you can tell I'm a huge romantic. I often get accused of being way too, scientific when I'm talking about
Oh, I
things that,
like it.
maybe science doesn't apply to. But I I think that when we get into relationships, and I did this myself, so I'm talking from my own experience, right? I think that we interview for the wrong position. We interview for the person that we like going to the movies with. And then we find out, that their job is actually co-CEO of our household,
Yeah,
right? Once we have, 2, 3 kids and 2 careers and a dog, right? And suddenly we're like, okay, now it's not so cute that I like going to the movies with you because you're not bringing enough to the table for the job that I actually needed to hire you for, right? So I encourage people to think about that, during those early days where you're just talking about what bands you like, right? To also talk about who does your laundry? How much do you cook at home versus order takeout? How do you think our house is going to look when you grow up, right? And how much time are we going to spend with our kids versus, use childcare?
yeah.
And by the way, if one of our kids is sick and we both have an important meeting, how do we decide who stays home?
That's the right question. Very good. But what if I'm asking those questions as an economist or as an entrepreneur? I'm thinking, okay, this is perfect. This guy's a fixer-upper. He's not doing anything that I need. But when do you walk away from that failing business, if you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I mean, and I left a marriage, right? And that's part of the story that's in the book is my own story of, realizing that um life is really hard when you're in the squeeze, but for me I did not have the supports that I needed. And so it was harder for me because of the setup that I had. And so I made
Mm.
a big change. I left a marriage. I moved to Philadelphia. I traded my 2.5 hour train commute for a 7-minute bike commute.
Whoa.
And and then I got tenure at Wharton because I had time. I had time to put into my career. So there are times, and the book has a lot of information and questions to ask yourself, right? And I'm a huge champion for relationships. I think in the right relationship, it can be life changing because it has economic efficiency. You can specialize. You can each take on the tasks that one person is better at. You have returns to scale. It's a lot more economically efficient to have two people living in a household versus, one in each house. So I'm a big champion of trying to make it work if you can, but you also can't, fool yourself if it's not working. And so,
Yeah.
the book pushes you to say, hey, try to go through these exercises of tracking your time, trying to reallocate tasks, trying to treat this as a shared problem, because I think we treat men's careers as a shared project of the relationship, of the family. And we too rarely treat women's careers that way, as a shared project, to say, hey, we need to put resources into your career. And then, as any student of negotiation knows, there's something called your BATNA, your best alternative to negotiated agreement. And that's your backup if the renegotiation fails, right? So figure out what your BATNA is and figure out at what point would you decide, hey, it might be time to walk away.
Interesting. Well, I have two grown daughters. I'm going to have my daughters listen to this podcast episode because The dad advice I give is if it's a fixer upper, pull the plug.
And
Which
if it's early in the relationship, and so I want to say exactly, I want to say I was referring to you, you're already married, you already have
okay,
kids, right?
all right,
But if you are early in the relationship where you are just, you're starting out the relationship, you are not married, you do not have kids, right? Then again, if they are not bringing enough to the table that they are going to be the partner that you need
yes,
when life gets hard. You're
yes,
playing on easy mode now. Okay. You are playing on easy mode. So if you think it's tricky right now, if he's not picking his socks off the floor right now, okay, wait until there's four people's socks on the floor. So absolutely. I tell people all the time, I'm like, the evidence that you have is what's happening right now. It's not going to magically change and get better once you make life harder. Why would that happen? So absolutely. And time is costly. We've talked about that, but
yep,
it's more costly to women because we have this limited reproductive time horizon. So you don't want to spend 7, 8, 9 years in a relationship and then find out that it's not working.
yep.
So absolutely. If you are experiencing the things I'm talking about when you have a struggling marriage with 2 kids and you're already experiencing it and you're dating, you have options, girl.
There you go. That's what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
I always tell them too. Look, you're seeing the very best behavior right now. It doesn't get any better than this. It's not going to get any better than right now. Okay, very, very good. Hey, one surprise in the book is that you talk about life's purpose and what do you really want out of your life? How does economics fit into this whole question of what do I want to do with my life?
Well, as I said, in order for me to think about your life like an economist, I have to know what your purpose is because that's the objective function. What economics is it's the study of maximizing subject to constraints. Firms maximize profits subject to the constraints of how much they need to pay for those inputs, how much they need to pay their workers, how fast they can make things, right? And you are maximizing your utility function subject to all the constraints you face. I think the mistake people make is that we have been brainwashed by the lean in mindset to think that that purpose is our jobs. And I want us to
Interesting.
take a step back and say, what do I want my life to feel like? What do I want the experience of my scarce years on this earth to be? What do I want the experience of my days to be? What do I want time with my family to feel like? And yeah, it is strange. I think maybe coming from an economist, I have people do a vision board to say, to try to get back in touch with that North Star because we have lost sight of it because we exist within capitalism, which I'm not saying that's bad, but they have their own objective function.
That's right.
Their objective function, your job and your boss's objective function is to maximize profit. So it is really useful if you then believe that your objective is also to maximize their profit, but it's not.
Okay, boy, I love that. So I love the way you think about it though, because right, I've always believed that if a company can get along without you, they will. Their goal is to maximize their own profit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a business relationship. When I coach individuals, I talk to them a lot about their careers. I always say, test your value and also just recognize that this is a business and it's a business decision if you decide to leave. I mean, I know it's overly simplistic, but the point is
No.
if you try to make
Yeah.
it too romantic and too emotional, they don't look at it that way as the company.
No, absolutely not. And I actually tell people to be more transactional with their employers, to
Yeah,
think of it as this is where I put my time to get money out, right? Because I think often it is, if it's, people romanticize it, it's a one sided romance.
good. This book is going to be helping so many people. Like it's going to be a bestseller. Tell me, Corinne, what would you hope that someone would think or do differently as a result of reading Having It All?
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, I think one of the biggest takeaways I want people to have, the first big takeaway I want is it's not in my head, it's in the data. And that's why that evidence was so important because for me, having lived it, once I then started studying it and I saw my experiences affirmed in the data, I said, oh my God, right? Like, this isn't just me, it's so many people. And I think there's so many women out there saying, it's just me, there's something wrong with me. So, first, I want you to know it's not you, right? It is these structural forces making your life hard. And then I want you to take the book as a mandate to make changes because you deserve a life that is rich and satisfying and happy and that has joy in it. And I think as women, we are trained to give to other people, to create happiness and joy for other people, right? And we don't do it for ourselves. And so I hope that the book is a call to action take a hard look at the deals that you're getting from your job, from your relationship, and renegotiate those deals to maximize your utility.
Oh, that's good. Renegotiate those deals. You talked about how women, I'm paraphrasing, but they do give to others and they care for others. And how much of that is biology, evolution versus more societal pressures, the Instagram mom? What do you think?
Yeah. I think it's absolutely both. When you look at the evolutionary forces that act on women, there is this extra force of being that, um, you know, incubator and primary caregiver for infants, right? That creates this evolutionary drive in order to propagate our genes to caretake, right? And I think it is somewhat incompatible with our modern day lives because we are giving too much of that caring energy, as I said, to our jobs that don't necessarily deserve it, right? Even to relationships where we're not getting that same energy back. And so I think that it is that. And then I do think it is also societal pressures that you're made to feel like you're going to be selfish if you actually take care of yourself. And so one of the ways I try to get women when they feel really stuck to make this change is I say the reason that the phrase is put on your own oxygen mask first is not because you're more important than the kid. It's because you literally cannot put on the kid's oxygen mask if you pass out,
Mm,
right? You have to take care of yourself to be able to take care of them. And so even if you will not believe yet that you are just inherently worthy of your own care, you have to do it because you cannot take care of these other people if you aren't taking care of yourself. And that's the lesson that I had to learn the hard way.
really, really great point. Okay, Corinne, there are a lot of men listening to this podcast. Your main message to men right now would be what? What do we need to know?
I hope that men do read the book. I hope they get the book and they read it and they look at the data because I think it's going to surprise them. Yeah,
Shock me.
when men hear, because they know they're doing more than their dads did with the kids, but when they hear, oh, but the ratio of time has actually gotten worse than it was a generation ago because moms spend so much more time. And so it's actually gotten worse, relatively speaking. I think men have overinvested in competitiveness on the labor market and the career market. And I don't think they're very competitive right now in the marriage market because women are bringing so much to the table. They're able to win the bread and they're able to bake it, right? And so if you're just going to show up and say, well, I have a paycheck, that's not enough anymore.
Ooh.
And by the way, you could get laid off, you could get injured, right? So you have to be bringing more to the table. You have to be contributing to the partnership in a more multifaceted way because that's what your wife is doing now.
Oh,
So I hope that men also see, this is the next gender revolution that we need. And I think it's going to lead to them being happier in the long run.
okay. Well, Corinne, that's a truth bomb. I didn't see that coming. So, okay, guys, let's get after this. I think Corinne's throwing down the gauntlet. We can do more, need to do more. I think that's really a great perspective. It's not enough just to bring home a paycheck. I like that. Okay, Corinne, right now, somewhere, there is a woman on a train, and she is thinking, I'm trying to have it all. And she knows she doesn't have anything. What is one or
Mm.
two things you would recommend to that person listening that would just move them a little bit forward to the life that they really want?
What I'm going to say is going to sound funny because it might seem like your last priority. But what I want that person to do is to carve out space for joy and carve it out in their calendar. So I want them to think about the thing that they use their time for that nourishes them the most. And I want them to prioritize that thing and make sure that they get more of it. We end up kind of taking that leisure time when we have little time crumbles left over. And
Hmm.
by that point, we're so depleted that it's not really nourishing time. It's just something that kind of just evaporates like that, right? And so I want you to view the mandate of your life to maximize utility. And the first way you're going to do that is by putting joy first. So find a space where you can put it on your calendar, block it out the same way you would an important meeting, and don't let anything eat up that time. And when you do that, because it's just going to refill your cup just the tiniest bit, it's just going to give you that littlest bit of battery charge back. I think that's going to help you make some of the deeper changes.
That's great. Corinne, you're doing a lot. What is the best way to follow you and everything you have going on?
Well, thank you so much. I'm on Instagram, Corinne Low PhD. I have a newsletter, the Feminomics newsletter. That's corinnelow.substack.com. And if you just go to my website, corinnelow.com, you can find all of my links there.
Okay, Corinne, you may not know this, but at the end of every podcast episode, I ask my guests, what is your I Dare You challenge for all of us? I can't wait for this. So you would dare us to do what to live a better life? What do you think?
So I dare you to reclaim your time. And there's three ways I want you to do that. I want you to renegotiate some things in your household. So I want you to find one thing that you can reallocate to somebody else in your household. I want you to find one thing that you can eliminate because it doesn't actually need to be done during this period in your life. I call that throwing out your house plants. Okay, you know what I mean? And I want you to find one thing that you can outsource because there's somebody who can do it more efficiently than you can. And you can't afford that much of your own time.
All right. Well, Corinne, you win from an I Dare You challenge standpoint. That was the most specific and actionable, and I think life-changing as well, those three things. So thank you for that. Everyone, the name of the book available today. It's Having It All, What Data Tells Us About Women's Lives and Getting the Most Out of Yours. Corinne, we could talk for another 4 hours. I won't do that to you, but I'd love to have you back at another time so we can go deeper into some of these topics. It has been just a treat to have you on this podcast and to give us a different perspective on some of these very important topics. So best of luck to you, and thanks for being here.
Well, thanks so much, Darren. And thank you to everybody for listening to this conversation. I'm so excited to talk about this book more and to see how it impacts people's lives. So just thank you for having it and to bringing it to your listeners.
It's so true. But are you open to coming back on at a later time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
But this was a great conversation, Darren. I
because
really did enjoy it. So
good.
thank you for that because
Yeah.
it makes a difference. I've done a lot of podcasts and a lot of people don't read the book,
Mm.
so thank you. And yeah, I think the only thing I didn't say, which I should have, and so maybe, you can add it, is just that they can get the book any place that they buy books. So, it's on Amazon, it's on Barnes and Noble. So, they can get it
You
anywhere.
know what? I'll make sure I add that in, and I'm going to hit stop recording right now, and then River